Hello and welcome to Realms Edge Gaming. In this episode, I thought we could do something a little bit different. And what I was going to do is I was going to read you a bit of a story that I've written to do with the Gloomspite Gitz and the Seraphon. If you've got any comments below about what you think of it, I'd love to hear them. Any kind of pointers to improve it, that would be fantastic. Or if you'd like to hear something similar with a different faction in the future, I'd love to get your perspective on it too. If you've not already subscribed to the channel, if you could consider doing so, that would be brilliant. And if you could drop a like below if you enjoyed it. The story is called The Line in the Sand. It was a miracle. The only surviving egg in its clutch after eons of embryonic development, blessed with some primeval sentience allowing it to roll short distances through the dust, the amber-scale lizard had avoided being consumed by fauna and flora too numerous to mention. Neither had it drowned in the amniotic fluid designed to protect it until it had reached maturity, nor been overheated or buried in the shifting sands in which it sat. The reptile delicately used its egg tooth to crack a large hole, just large enough to take its first breath of Ghurite air. It blinked slowly in the cool night air as a gust of wind whipped the sand away that lay loose on the surface of the arid landscape. Crack! With a sickening squelch, Drizzit crushed the creature underfoot, squinting distastefully at the barren landscape littered with bones. He spat dispassionately, instinctively letting out a malicious hiss. A disparate mob of grots trailed behind him, wrapping their ragged black cloaks around them, occasionally glaring balefully up at the sky. Drizzit stomped on. His usually irascible nature had steadily worsened throughout the journey, and now, due to their prolonged exposure to starlight, had given way to being downright spiteful. He hated this place, traipsing in the sand. He hated the open space too, missing the familiarity of the slime-slick claustrophobic tunnels. But most of all, he hated the stars. Glare-faced Frazzlegate had been depicted as a star since time immemorial, and the Star Swollowaz knew that in order to bring on the Everdank, then all would need to be extinguished from the sky. Fortunately, the bad moon helped them accomplish this by swallowing any stars foolish enough to get in its way. All Star Swollowers knew what fate awaited if they failed, for they knew glare-faced Frazzlegate would grow too strong, and the stars would multiply, making a huge constellation, and ushering in a new era of almost permanent light. "It's here somewhere," Drizzit hissed, beady red eyes glaring out from under his black cowl, the image of the bad moon swallowing a star crudely daubed onto it in thick yellow dye, made from the many squigs that infested the lairs below. Drizzit could feel the other Gitz staring at him, glancing downwards as he stared at his loon rock, which seemed to glow almost constantly with a pallid lambent yellow light. Some grots had followed out of curiosity. Others he knew were looking for an opportunity to murder him and take his admittedly low-ranking place in the Star Swollowaz clan, but he knew he was loon-touched and marked for greatness. The moon had showed him so. The Gitz had already traipsed for days through the network of tunnels that made up their lurk lair. The journey hadn't been uneventful either. They had lost Zoggit and Grabbit in one of the tunnels when the stalactites and stalagmites had rapidly closed like a moor around them as they trailed behind. Snicket had been smushed to a bloody pulp by a sleeping rockgut Troggoth, who had awoken in a blind rage after Snicket had trodden on its nose, believing the beast to be a pile of stones. Enraged, he'd grabbed the Git by the leg and smashed him against the wall of the cave until the screaming stopped. Naturally, the others had all fled, leaving Snicket to his fate. They trudged on. Suddenly, Drizzit saw the weird lizard lines in the sand that the moon had showed him during his increasingly frequent hallucinations. Perfectly straight and interconnecting before jutting off at angles that made his head spin and his eyes sting as they shimmered with an opalescent light that seemed to pulse rhythmically, though in tune with what he did not know. "Here it is!" screeched Drizzit triumphantly, arms outstretched expansively, gesturing to the evidence that would prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the moon had spoken to him. The others looked shiftily at one another. "Here's what," said Cruggit bluntly. "You bashed your head a summit." Drizzit stomped over to the line, which seemed to pulse even harder. The brightness grew with iridescent intensity, and he could feel the pounding in his head growing harder. He shielded his eyes as he approached. Maybe it was the blinding light, but now they were here, it seemed like something was missing from his vision. He shrugged and aimed a kick at the line to give emphasis as he spat. "The lizard lines, you great—" But as soon as his foot connected, there was a loud bang causing Drizzit to be knocked over, with a screech, as a wave of pure azure light washed over them all. He felt it burning straight away, and recoiled instinctively, shielding his eyes. As he shakily scrambled to his feet, he noticed that other Gitz still stood frozen motionless in poses of incredulity, some pointing, some laughing, some scratching their heads, arms at various angles. Time had stood still. Drizzit was just about to take the opportunity to stab Cruggit without fear of retaliation or witnesses, when it appeared, flickering in and out of existence just as he'd seen it. Slabs of rectangular stone, stacked one on top of another, in varying states of decay. Vines snaked their way up the monolith, while golden plaques depicting lizards, snakes, stars and symbols that made his head hurt decorated up to the top, where a black orb hung levitating. Flickering lightning crackled and arced around it, suspending parts of a circular plaque in bizarre stasis, guarded by 4 golden serpents bent into unnatural angles. The orb started to spin rapidly, whirring wildly. A loud thrumming noise grew in volume as it gathered momentum. Then the area around the ground exploded. Vines burst forth like monstrous serpents as tropical plants rent the barren earth all around them. Where there was once dry, dusty land, glassy algae covered pools of water dredged upwards and bubbled to the surface, whereupon lily pads bloomed with verdant growth. All manner of insects buzzed and fluttered in the air, which suddenly felt stifling and temperate. There was another flicker, and Drizzit froze. A giant cerulean-coloured lizard stood blinking, slowly passing in and out of existence, till its almost crocodilian form remained solid. The creature didn't seem perturbed by the events that had unfolded, but simply looked around slowly, before hefting its giant mace and staring at the assembled Gitz frozen in front of it. Cold yellow eyes narrowed as it let out a subsonic click. The obsidian orb sparked madly. There was a loud crack. Drizzit could just about make out the partially obscured monolith behind the canopy before the orb sent out a pulse of energy. Then the jungle came alive and the carnage began. Drizzit had just enough time to see Cruggit's incredulous expression before he was swallowed by the marshy ground on which he stood. Stabbit screeched as innumerable serpents covered him before he disappeared entirely, and then the lizard struck, smashing into the Star Swollowaz with a speed and agility that belied its size. It wielded the mace effortlessly, as bodies were hurled in all directions as the monster attacked with primitive ferocity. Those that weren't initially knocked back by the impetus of the charge were caught as they ran by the beast's jaws and claws, rending limbs in a shower of gore. Drizzit felt a wave of panic and turned to flee. The clouds roiled like the sickly greenish-grey smoke from an arachne cauldron, then slowly slid apart to reveal a familiar leering face. "It's the moon!" howled Drizzit. "It's come for the star!" The remaining grots whooped and howled, high-pitched reedy voices clamouring with renewed confidence and vigour. The bad moon continued its erratic path, before eclipsing Frazzlegit. Then all went black. As quickly as they had appeared, the fauna and flora flickered in and out of existence, and then disappeared. All that remained was the ruined monolith, the black orb now extinguished and smoking softly. Drizzit's robes crackled with barely contained static as he clambered up the steps until he reached the top, where the golden box was that he had seen in his visions, pieces interlinked and twisted at various angles and points, helped by an intricate pattern of sliding mechanisms and cogs that he couldn't fathom. He now had one of the lizard's precious stars. All around the remaining Gitz, purple loon caps had started to sprout from the ground in erratic patches where the light of the moon touched, casting their sickly bioluminescence and causing shadows to dance madly. Drizzit knew the other Star Swollowaz would soon be here, drawn to the glare of the bad moon. He sneered, pocketing the star. The sky seemed a little darker already.